Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Glasgow Times election hustings. We are joined tonight by Susan Aitken, leader of the SNP group and leader of Glasgow City Council, Malcolm Cunning, leader of the Labour group at Glasgow City Council, Thomas Kerr, leader of the Conservative group at Glasgow City Council, and John Molyneux, co-leader of the Scottish Greens at Glasgow City Council. The event is being streamed live on the Glasgow Times Facebook, Twitter and YouTube channels, and you can comment on the video section on each of those platforms. How the evening will go is we will invite each of the leaders in turn to make a brief opening statement of up to 2 minutes. Then we'll have questions, some of which have been posed by readers already, and some other questions which will come in the comments, hopefully. And then we will ask the leaders to make their closing remarks. Just before we streamed live, we did a draw to see who would speak first, and the order of opening statements will be Thomas Kerr for the Conservatives, followed by Malcolm Cunning for Labour, John Molyneux for the Greens, and Susan Aitken for the SNP. And we will reverse that at the end for the closing statements. So if I can invite Thomas Kerr to make a brief opening statement of 2 minutes. Thomas.
Okay, thank you very much, Stuart, and thank you to the Glasgow Times and everybody behind the scenes who have arranged for this to take place. I think this is the first leaders hustings that we've had this election campaign, and it is so crucial to hear from all the different parties. So thank you for that, and thank you to all the readers of the Glasgow Times for sending over the questions and for everything that we're going to be discussing tonight. Obviously, Stuart's introduced me. My name is Thomas Kerr. I'm the group leader of the Glasgow Conservatives, and we're standing in this election with a key manifesto pledge to clean up the city, because for the past 5 years we've seen an incompetent and useless administration that has let down the citizens of Glasgow. We believe that the city has never looked as bad as it is, with fly tipping, rats running rampant, overflowing bins, potholes not being collected. And I think there's a crucial question that all Glaswegians should be asking themselves. Are we better off now than we were 5 years ago? I don't believe that is the case. We've had a 16% increase in council tax over the past 5 years, yet you've consistently had cuts to our budget and consistently had cuts to our frontline services. I believe Glasgow deserves better. But I believe it deserves better as well than a useless Labour administration, which I think we're on the verge of maybe getting as well, because over the past 35 years before the SNP took power, our city was neglected by a Labour administration that took the people for granted. So only the Glasgow Conservatives are often a real alternative in this election to stand up for our forgotten communities and to clean up the city. And that's why I would urge everybody to vote Glasgow Conservative next Thursday.
Okay, thank you very much, Thomas. If I could now ask Malcolm Cunning from Scottish Labour to make his opening remarks. Malcolm.
You're muted, Malcolm.
Thank you. Sorry, my name's Malcolm Cunning. I'm obviously leader of the Labour group on Glasgow City Council and have been for some 18 months or so. This is clearly a crucial election for Glasgow City, because what we desperately need in these times, post-pandemic, is an administration that actually stands up for the city, an administration that looks for a failed deal for the city to tackle some of the deep-seated issues, many of which are a product of £350 million in total, having been robbed out of Glasgow's budget since 2013 by an SNP administration in Holyrood. We need an administration that will demand fair funding for this city. And it's only because if we have fair funding for this city that we can start tackling some of the issues that faces at the moment. And that is particularly things like 269 staff have disappeared, frontline staff have disappeared from cleansing services. Those need to be reinstated. The state of the city is not because the people are particularly dirty or messy. The state of the city is because we have not got the resources at the moment to keep up with the pressure that's on the department, because simply we do not have the people on the ground. Those and a whole range of other issues need tackled, and that needs an administration that puts Glasgow first. And putting Glasgow first would be first and foremost the work of a Labour administration come May the 6th.
Thank you, Malcolm. If I can ask John Molyneux for Scottish Greens.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart, and thanks to Glasgow Times readers for participating in this event. I'm John Molyneux, co-leader of the Green Group in the Council. These elections are about the future of local services, and they're about how we plan for the future of our local communities. But for Scottish Greens, the answers to those things also have to address the big global challenges that we face. And the climate emergency is the greatest of those. Climate is causing chaos around the world and increasingly close to home. So we need to take urgent action. We can't put this off for another election cycle. We need people to elect Greens now. We need people to give their number one vote to the Scottish Greens. In the Scottish Parliament elections last year, more people than ever before voted Green, and that put Greens into government for the first time. And we've shown there we can deliver transformative policies like free bus travel for under 22s. We can bring an even stronger focus on climate action and social justice into the city chambers. Green councillors are already making a big difference. We secured the city's net zero target for 2030, a £17 million climate action fund to start delivering that, investments in Europe's biggest fleet of zero emission bin lorries, expansion of safe cycle lanes, commitment to divestment from fossil fuels. But we now have to deliver on those commitments and that ambition. The best way to guarantee that is by electing more Greens. Our manifesto is a comprehensive plan setting out the urgent action that we'll take to ensure a fair and fast transition. And that will mean warmer homes, safer streets, more and better recycling, and a public transport revolution. So Greener Glasgow is a fairer Glasgow, and that's why we're asking everyone to give their number one vote to the Scottish Greens on the 5th of May.
Okay, thank you, John. If I can now ask Susan Aitken for the SNP.
Thanks very much, and good evening, everyone. Everything that we do is for Glasgow. That's been the SNP City Administration's guiding principle for the past 5 years. And as we look towards the next 5, it's the solemn pledge that we're taking into this election and that we make to every Glaswegian. Our manifesto is probably the most comprehensive plan ever put before Glaswegian voters. It's focused on securing a fair, green and resilient recovery for our public services, our economy and communities from the profound and tragic impact of the COVID pandemic, and on doing everything in our power as a council to support and sustain Glaswegian households through the Tory cost of living crisis. And it's building on a genuine record of achievement. To name just a few, we have delivered the best ever destinations for Glasgow's school leavers, exceeding the Scottish average for the first time ever. We've delivered 1,140 hours of free early learning and childcare annually. We successfully hosted COP26, and we've established Glasgow as a world leader in the fight against climate change. We've secured Scottish Government backing for the construction of the Clyde Metro and secured investment to clean up Glasgow's bus fleet. We've supported household incomes with our holiday food programme, the extension of free school meals, our new cost of living crisis fund. We secured record levels of funding to build 5,500 affordable homes, and we've transformed homelessness services in the city. We've brought record levels of inward investment in new jobs into Glasgow, and we've compensated thousands of women workers for Labour's historic gender pay discrimination. I'm proud of what the SNP has achieved in the face of some of the biggest challenges the city has ever faced. But there's so much more to do, and we have got the plan to deliver it. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and thanks to all 4 leaders for their opening comments. I'd like to move on to some questions that we have had submitted by readers. They've decided the topics that we're going to ask on. And the first one, and we get this when we go around the streets as well, which we have been doing, like the parties have been doing during the election. And the main one that keeps coming up is refuse and cleanliness. We've had one of the readers, John Stevens, said that the refuse service is shocking. He lives in the High Street area and he said it's plagued with rats as a result. Another, Andrew Montgomery, said that cleanliness is a challenge. So the first question we would like to ask is the city in a shocking state, and how will you deal with it urgently, as Mr. Stephen had asked? So I'd like to go first to that, to the council leader, Susan Aitken.
Thanks for that question. And I think it is understandable that it is the thing that comes up most often. It always is, and it always has been, certainly ever since I've been a councillor. It's the thing that fills councillors' inboxes most. But there's no question that the past couple of years have taken a toll on a lot of our public services, actually, but the one that is most noticeable and that all citizens see the impact of is our cleansing services and the cleanliness of local streets and roads in particular. We, as the SNP, I have to say, inherited a service that was badly in need of modernisation and which had been underinvested for a long time, chronic underinvestment. And Glasgow was the only local authority in Scotland not even signed up to the Scottish Household Recycling Charter, for example. So there was a long way to go. And we were making significant progress in terms of investment. We had replaced all of the backcourt old ash cans, metal ash cans, with modern wheelie bins, for example. We'd replaced all of the street bins. We'd started to invest in the modernisation of our depots where our cleansing staff work. And we'd started to recruit to replace a significant attrition of staff, which happened right in the very early part of our administration due to a load of temporary jobs that Labour had created just before the election, and a lot of those people left, even though we did make those jobs permanent. So we inherited some challenges, but COVID had a massive impact. There was a huge impact on our workforce, up to 50% absence rates at some point. And so we did have to pull people off of services, particularly day-to-day street cleaning, in order to make sure that the bin collection service and domestic refuse continued throughout the pandemic, which it did. And I have to say, we collected 99.8% of bins during the height of the pandemic. Of course, we'd prefer it was 100, but I'm not sure it ever has been in the city.
Yeah, okay.
But we know there's a lot of catching up to do. And the SNP in our joint budget with the Greens that we put forward and was passed in February have put very significant investment, considerably more than the other parties, I have to say, into recruiting staff, into more investment in infrastructure and cleansing, and into returning services that haven't actually been delivered by the council for a long time, like cleaning up leaves.
I'd like to put that to Malcolm. Susan, you said that the SNP inherited a badly organised service that had to be reformed. I'd like to put that to Malcolm Cunning. Did Labour leave the SNP a mess to clear up in terms of cleansing?
What Labour left was indeed the investment programme that Councillor Aitken was just claiming credit for, because the process of investing in replacing the old-fashioned bins and back courts, etc., was started and the funding set aside under the last administration. Rather than initiated under this administration. Clearly the work has been completed under this administration, but the funding and the process of moving had already and had long started before the current administration took over the reins in 2017. I think what is absolutely clear is that out in the streets, speaking to people at their doors, and I've spoken to thousands of people, is that people now think that the Glasgow, not only their communities, but they keep mentioning the city centre as well, is dirtier, more graffiti-ridden, and less attractive than it has ever been. And that is a consistent message from the residents. And it's unfortunate that up until now, the city leadership has seemed to dismiss those concerns or simply say that the area needs a gussy up. We need significant investment in frontline people actually sweeping the streets, actually lifting the litter, actually tidying up public areas and parks and open spaces across the city, because many of them are currently a disgusting mess.
Okay, so how would you do that, and how would you pay for it as well?
Well, it's
Just
certainly
briefly before I move on to John and Thomas.
Well, key in our manifesto is the replacement of some 250 frontline staff back into cleansing, and also over a 3-year period. It was in our budget proposal this year, a 6 million investment in a cleaner, greener Glasgow that would create 400 trainee posts with the very specific job of improving the city for all its citizens.
Thank you, Malcolm. If I could ask John Molyneux for his take on that. Do you agree that the city is in a shocking state, as some of the readers have said? And
I do, and I think part of the thing that upsets people about this is a sense of denial of the problem, and a sense that we're pushing the blame onto people. So in my parts of my ward in tenements, there's been food waste bins that festered for over 2 years, and the messaging that was going out to householders around that was very much about, you've not been using your service correctly. But there is a real feeling that the council didn't meet its side of the bargain. And I think the other point here is about how changes have been made. I think there's very much a kind of top-down culture. A council knows best idea that the services are delivered, and the service changes that were started under Labour but carried on. Again, bins in my ward moved from the back courts out into the front of the street, which has just created all sorts of problems. So it's, and those changes were made right at the start of the pandemic in lockdown when people had no chance to respond to them. So there's some real lessons that need to be learned. I think cultural lessons about how we get people on board, because we're not going to, we are not going to solve this issue unless we get people doing the right thing and working with us to make sure that our services are working. And that's about working, on a much more local level. We have put the investment in through the budget, and I'm particularly pleased we put investment into the neighbourhood coordinators, who are problem solvers. They are the people, they are frontline workers. They are actually working with communities and residents to deal with the issues, because there are distinct problems in different parts of the city, different housing types, different neighbourhoods. This isn't about one size fits all. We have to have a real kind of concentrated, targeted approach. The one other thing I'd add, we can't fix this problem unless we also accept that the throwaway society we have is part of this. This is an entirely avoidable problem. We're spending public money picking up litter that shouldn't be there. There's a lot in how our economy is designed, how products are designed, that we need to change. Greens in government are changing that. We're going to introduce a deposit return scheme on drinks containers, 20p when you take it back to the shops. That will have a massive impact on litter. We're banning the most common single-use plastics, so they'll be taken out of our system. And we're going to consult on a charge on single-use coffee cups. So these are the systemic changes that are also needed to really get to the root of this issue, because we can't just keep putting public money after cleaning up. We have to think about dealing with the solution long term. Okay,
thank you, John. And Thomas, I think this has probably been the focus of the Conservatives campaign in Glasgow so far. So we know that you think the city's in a shocking state, so we need to ask what you would do about it. And you want to reverse the frequency of the bin collections. Would that not just generate more waste and add to the climate change problem that we've got and reduce the recycling rates in the city? What's your plan for cleaning up the city?
I think the first thing is, I'm not surprised that this is the number one issue that's coming up with yous, because it's the number one issue that we've been getting, not just for this election cycle, but for years. The state of the city has been mentioned to me consistently. And although we've had a lot of spin there from the council leader, there has been a complete denial by the council leadership that there's been a problem. We've been told that apparently the city just needs a spruce up, or it needs a gussy up, or it's a wee ned with a spray can. It is ludicrous, the amount of excuses that we've heard from the council leadership, rather than accepting that there's been a problem and trying to come to a solid solution as to how we fix it. Now, I set out the Glasgow Conservatives plan last October. This isn't just an election issue for me. This is something I've been campaigning on consistently. We've got a 5-point plan that does talk about reversing bin collection cuts and returning the front property, main door properties back to a two-weekly collection date. We would scrap the bulk uplift charge. We were the only party, Stewart, that voted consistently not to introduce a bulk uplift charge because we believed it was going to lead to an increase in fly tipping. I'm glad Councillor Cunning has now followed us, but Labour's budget actually supported us as well, and Councillor Cunning was the City Treasurer under Councillor McAfee's leadership. So I'm glad that we've been consistent on that issue. We want to create an environmental enforcement team, and we want to invest £10 million into frontline staff over the next 5 years, as well as said that we would not introduce a garden waste programme. Now, you mentioned the issue to do with bin collections. The biggest problem I think that happened when we put the bin collections to a free weekly collection rate is that actually the problem it had created was because it was a council budget decision. There was no strategic plan as to how we were going to try and make sure we were dealing with the cleansing issues. There was no issue to try and make sure that this was happening, to try and think of a long-term solution, to try and make sure that people's property and waste was done properly. This was done because it was a budget decision and it was an easy cut, as cleansing normally is. And that's what's happened under this administration over the past 5 years. Every single year, cleansing seems to be the place where it's been hammered. And only this year, when there's been an election coming on, has Councillor Aitken and the SNP actually started to take the cleansing issue seriously in this city.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. The other question that we return to repeatedly when we ask readers what their big issues are in the city is roads and pavements. Potholes in the roads, broken pavements as well, has become more of an issue in recent months. What's your plan to ensure that we have a long-lasting solution to repairing potholes and resurfacing roads rather than having to do repairs every single year where the potholes come back? And how much money would you invest in that to ensure that that's no longer a problem for not just motorists, but for pedestrians, for people using wheelchairs, for people pushing prams, for people on bikes, everyone that uses our roads and pavements? If I can ask John Molyneux first.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. And at the point you made at the end there about this being an equalities issue, I think is really important. This isn't just, just car drivers. This is affecting everybody who needs to use our roads and pavements, and it is, it is a real concern. The reports that come before the Environment Committee every year setting out the investment that's needed just to keep a steady state. It's an eye-watering sum, and we don't have enough in our capital programme to deliver that. So we need to find ways of generating extra capital income. We should be pushing for more capital investment from the Scottish Government to tackle this issue, because it does need that level of investment. At the moment, we're just running to catch up. We do also need to look at what's causing the issue and what's making it worse. We had a debate on this at the last council meeting of the year, and we were pleased that in that debate there was recognition that different road users have a different level of impact on the degradation of our road surface. So HGVs, heavier vehicles, SUVs have a greater impact. We need to think about how we address that. The new parking measures that we brought in will have additional measures around people driving SUVs. So we do actually need to look at the cause. So the investment in active travel, investment in low traffic neighbourhoods, these are also a big part of the solution, that using the huge amount of public space that we have in the city, putting that to better use, making a much more people-friendly space, and that will once we've got that catch-up investment done, that will mean that we can stay ahead of the problem and we don't get back to the situation that we've got in our roads across the city right now.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to ask Malcolm Cunning that same question. How would you create longer lasting solutions and create safer spaces in the street for people to use?
I mean, clearly there's a whole range of things requiring to be done, and as Councillor Molyneux pointed out, all of them cost very considerable amounts of money. What we would be looking to do is to have a long-term strategy and looking to build long-term investment and set the money aside for a long-term investment in our street and pavement infrastructure. We have for many, many years quite often taken the cheaper solutions of skim surfaces on local roads. and though they improve the surface of the road, they do not improve the actual structure of the road below that surface, and often the road then deteriorates very quickly thereafter, particularly if there is a bad winter, or if the road that's being resurfaced has particularly heavy traffic use, whether that's buses or articulated vehicles, etc., that it simply can't stand up to that. There also is the question in that of fair funding, again, for Glasgow, because one of the issues that has been raised time and time again by Glasgow City Council, and we did it in administration as well, and even when Labour were in administration in Holyrood as well, we kept raising it, is that effectively the funding by the funding mechanism for roads is such that, for example, the Clyde Tunnel, the length of the Clyde Tunnel gets the same sort of grant, as it were, from the Scottish Government funding as a country road that is used by 3 vehicles and a tractor a day, because it is not seen as an arterial route and therefore has to be maintained by Glasgow City Council. But it takes millions out of our budget over the past several years. Millions and millions of pounds have been spent maintaining, quite properly, the Clyde Tunnel, but that has come out of Glasgow's budget in most instances. So there's arguments around there, but we wish to create a long-term investment plan so that we can prioritise those routes that need to be not only skimmed, but actually relaid, and to do that to pavements. And that has to be done in a coordinated way with those organisations that, whether it's gas, electricity or fibre, that tend to be digging up our roads and pavements. And it has to go hand in hand with the scheme, the avenue schemes and the other schemes that are going on, in order to make travel easier for people, and particularly travel easier for people who opt to walk and to cycle.
Okay, thank you. If I can ask Susan Aitken, the council has spent a lot of money recently on things that Malcolm mentioned there, like the avenues projects, but somehow we're still getting people all over the city saying that the roads and pavements are a disgrace, basically. What's been done just now, and what would you look to do in the future if re-elected?
So we do spend a huge amount of money. In actual fact, we've invested more in our roads over the past 5 years than any time previously, something like £81 million. And we are already moving towards that long-term strategy that Malcolm's talking about. It was agreed at committee, and we've started to move away from short-term fixes, which had been in place for a long time, towards that longer term actual restructuring, not just of roads, but pavements as well. And I think that is absolutely crucial. I'll come to that in a minute. So that we do have that longer term strategy. It's not something that can be done overnight. And I'm not sure we'll ever get to a position where you have a road that's fixed and that's it, unless we also take action on the kinds of issues that John was talking about, on actually reducing traffic. Part of the reason that we do have more pressure on our roads and we have to spend more and more is because there is more traffic than ever before, and it's heavier than ever before. Glasgow's roads are actually, in comparison to, despite the fact that we have more traffic than anywhere else, I think because of the investment that we've made, Glasgow is in the top 25% of local authorities in Scotland for the quality of our roads. I don't know what that says about other local authorities, but we do pretty well, and that's independent national surveys that say that. But because of the very severe pressures, it is constant. It feels like there's this constant cycle of always having to go back, and breaking that cycle is what's particularly important, I think. And so it is about a lot of the plans that we've got in place for low traffic neighbourhoods, for something like the avenues. The active travel plan, which is comprehensive, which covers the entire city, a very significant investment, almost £500 million. Times, but that looks at the entirety of our road network, our pavement network, our cycle network, and actually looks at how you invest in that as a whole, for people to use roads by whatever mode they're using them, whether that's on a bike, whether it's walking, whether it's in a wheelchair, whether it's on a bus, or indeed whether it's driving. Ultimately, it's people who need to use our roads and our pavements. And so we need to understand best how people are going to use those, not just now, but most crucially in the future, to make them safer as well. Road safety continues to be a massive issue, and often in our most deprived neighbourhoods as well. So absolutely, the investment needs to be there, and the investment is there. At the most recent budget, in addition to the existing roads budget, assigned an additional £25 million, with £1 million going to each ward in the city for community-led decision making about where communities particularly want to target spend on physical infrastructure in their neighbourhoods, so that we're responding directly to the way that local people experience their neighbourhoods and how they want to use them, rather than just constantly going through the cycle of fixing the same roads over and over again. So I think we are doing better in comparison than many people realise. That doesn't mean, though, that we're doing as well as we should, and it does need a different approach. It needs a more strategic approach, which, as I say, understands that the surface of the ground in our city, whether it's a road or a pavement or an open space, ultimately is for people, and the investment that we make needs to respond to the way that people use that now and in the future.
Okay, thank you, Susan. And Thomas Kerr, do you recognise that figure, that we're in the top 25% for quality of roads? And do you agree that we need less traffic to solve the problem?
Well, I think it'll be news to most Glaswegians that we're that high up compared to other local authorities. And I think Susan might be right there. It says a lot about other local authorities if that is the case. Because a lot of our roads, and I think a lot of Glaswegians would say that our roads are not up to the standard that they should be. In fact, a council committee report showed that we were 20 million short of what we had to be to make sure we were getting every pothole fixed in the roads in Glasgow. So I think that's an argument there. But on a point of consensus, can I just say I actually agreed with one thing that the SNP administration has done, and that's move away from these short-term fixes that were taking place, these patchworks that were taking place over the 35 years that Labour was in charge, to try and come up with a long-term solution to make sure that we were sorting our roads properly. And for the Glasgow Conservatives, what we would do is we would double the Glasgow's road capital budget by the end of the next council term, and sooner if possible. But we'd also create a £1.5 million pothole residential fund to try and deal with residential streets, because the problem right now is a lot of money goes into our main carriageways but not into smaller residential streets, and that's an issue that's been brought up with us consistently. But my party nationally also supports having a pothole action fund, and we would do that nationally. But the biggest issue here is that there's a lot of stuff we'd like to do and a lot of investment we'd like to do in Glasgow, but we've had years and years of savage cuts from the Scottish Government, which is meaning we're not able to do that. So I think there has to be a conversation nationally about how we try and enshrine a fair funding deal for Glasgow, and that's something, again, the Conservatives have been leading on nationally, to make sure we had a Barnett-style consequential, to make sure that local governments were funded properly, because that's the key point here. We can all talk about what we'd like to see happen in Glasgow. Until we get the money from the Scottish Government, it's simply just wish lists. Okay,
thank you, Thomas. We've got some questions we'd like to put individually. We might not necessarily have to go around the entire panel on this, because they are party specific, and we've spoken a lot about budgets there and about where money will come from. So I'd like to ask Susan Aitken first. The Scottish Government has cut Glasgow's budget over the last decade or more by hundreds of millions of pounds cumulatively. How can you say that that's a good deal for Glasgow? And can you give voters an example of when you have stood up to the Scottish Government for the benefit of the city?
So I think we're always going to want more money for Glasgow, and the SNP in Glasgow will always argue for more money for Glasgow, as we always have done. And the local government allocation is never going to be enough. I've been very clear and very open, both in the newspapers and also directly in conversations with colleagues in the Scottish Government, that I think there needs to be a significant shift. And I think that that COSLA isn't going to do it under the current makeup of COSLA, so the Scottish Government has to lead the way on it, to significantly prioritise more within the way that local government is funded. Two things, one of which is cities and urban places, and the other is deprivation and poverty. And at the moment, the way that local government is funded, and that isn't just through the Scottish Government, of course, that's local government as a whole determines its own, the way that the pot is divided up. It doesn't recognise enough either of those aspects. And of course, both of those aspects are particularly crucial to Glasgow. So I've been very clear that I do think we need to see that change in coming budgets. Having said that, I think, although we always want to see the allocation for local government get bigger, there are also other elements of funding coming into Glasgow from national funding, which Glasgow particularly benefits from. And that overall quantum for public services and for supporting households is absolutely crucial. So if you take something like the Scottish Child Payment, for example, absolutely pioneering, described rightly, I think, as a game changer. Clearly, that is something from which Glasgow will particularly benefit, because we have a lot of families who are living with particular challenges and struggles, and that game-changing payment will come in disproportionate amounts to Glasgow. So that, although we do have those particular challenges, and I will always be critical and I will always ask for more, there is more coming in other ways. But I would also point to a number of areas where we, as an SNP administration, have gone and argued very, very strongly for extra money and investment into Glasgow, and we have secured it. I mentioned in the opening the record amount of funding that we've secured for affordable homes in Glasgow, and we get more in Glasgow than anywhere else, because we actually, it costs more to build a house in Glasgow than anywhere else, and we've made that case that Glasgow deserves to have more funding per house than elsewhere. I also argued specifically for funding for city centre recovery from the Scottish Government, and we got that too. I also went and argued for extra money during the pandemic for Glasgow's businesses, because we were in lockdown longer, and we got that too. And also, we've secured commitment from government to things like the Clyde Metro, or the Clyde Mission, which are major projects to tackle long-standing issues in Glasgow and indeed across the city region, whether that's vacant and derelict land, whether it's deprivation, whether it is a lack of modern joined-up transport. And those commitments have been made actually to invest billions in Glasgow and the city region over the coming years, which will be absolutely transformational.
Okay. Do we have funding for the Metro? I
will argue for more money in the annual budget, but I think we can point to a whole number of areas where we have secured commitments and funding for the city over and above that annual budget coming to Glasgow.
Okay. Can we put a figure on what funding has been secured for the Clyde Metro?
Well, for the Metro so far, it's estimated that will it'll be in the tens of billions, something around 80 billion investment in Glasgow, the Glasgow city region over about 25 years, and after a lot of work to make the case for that, the Clyde Metro was included as the priority project in the Scottish Government Strategic Transport Projects Review number 2, which was published towards the end of last year, and which, to put it in context, the first Strategic Transport Projects Review delivered the Queensferry Crossing. That was the priority project, and the priority project in the second one is Clyde Metro. That is the kind of transformational investment over many years, which will not just create the modern mass transit system that Glasgow's comparator cities have taken for granted for decades, and which we are lagging way behind on. But it will genuinely be transformative economically, environmentally, and in terms of improving social equality and outcomes as well for citizens right across the city region.
Okay, thank you. I recall in 2017, I think it was in the SNP manifesto as well, while we're speaking about transport, that there was a plan to extend the subway in Glasgow. Can I ask what happened to that plan?
Sorry, just unmuting. It's still something that I would like to pursue, I have to say. There is a plan there. It was looked at actually for the Commonwealth Games, but never taken forward. I would argue it's probably been superseded by the Metro, which is not just a new transport system in terms of a light rail or anything like that. Metro should be understood as a genuinely joined up integrated transport system. I tell you what I'd really like to do with the subway before then, though, is actually just have the subway run to its potential, which it has never really done, both in terms of its opening hours, for example, particularly at weekends, to have it operate as proper night transport in the city as part of the nighttime economy. The subway's never really been managed and operated to its full potential, and I think that would be a great starting point. But I would certainly still think that if there's a deliverable plan there, the extension of the subway would be a good thing to do. But in a lot of ways, we've kind of gone beyond that, and the commitment that we've got now for the Metro goes way beyond just an extension of the subway, if you like.
Okay, thank you. We've got some questions for Malcolm Cunning as well. Some of the readers have also mentioned the equal pay. While we're speaking about budgets as well, the equal pay settlement is putting pressures on the council budget just now. Labour pretty much created this problem, didn't it? So why didn't previous Labour administrations want to give the women workers a fair deal?
I think that's a false characterisation of what happened. And I do think it's unfortunate that to some extent there's a mythology grown up around this. There was a genuine attempt made in 2006, 2007 to address what was acknowledged as an equal pay issue in the pay and grading system of Glasgow, and acknowledged that there were similar problems in many other local authorities in Scotland and across the UK. And a new pay and grading system was instituted in 2006, 2007 at the unanimous agreement of the then Glasgow City Council. John Mason, MSP, voted for the new pay and grading system. The Conservatives voted for the new pay and grading system. Even Solidarity voted for the new pay and grading system at that stage. We then entered an absolutely tortuous period of time where, quite rightly, it has transpired, various organisations, both trade unions and Action for Equality, took up the case of women to say that perhaps the new pay and grading system had not successfully agreed that process. And the legal process was hugely complicated by the fact that actually the council won the first two cases on the basis of it was a legitimate scheme. That eventually went all the way to the inner house of the Court of Session, at which stage a decision was made by them that basically punted it back. And at that stage, unanimously, every single political party on Glasgow City Council agreed that the best way forward was to reach a negotiated settlement rather than have potentially another 10, 15 years of legal argument. And that was exactly the right thing to do. And we now have a situation where we still don't have a replacement pay and grading system. What we have done, and I'm pleased to see that the threat of strike action maybe concentrated some minds, but we've now got, I think, a guarantee of the second tranche of compensation that will take them, mainly women workers affected, up to, I understand, March this year. But we are looking at a period of time that may take us to about 2006 before the new pay and grading system is in place. And we are absolutely committed, if we form the administration in Glasgow City after May the 6th, is that we will put every effort into making sure that that is a speedy process and that we do finally have a pay and grading system that is fit for purpose.
Okay, I can see Councillor Aitken is shaking her head pretty vigorously at that. Would you want to respond very, very briefly to that before I move on to the...
Yeah, I mean, I'll be as brief as I can. There's a lot in there to respond to, but I think just that last point particularly, the new pay and grading system is, it will be in place by next year. The vast majority of the work has been done on it. And we are essentially, working along with the trade unions. We are all working towards the same outcome, which is to get that new pay and grading system in place, and to deliver the final phase of compensation for the women, which is our intention will take them right up to the point to where the new pay and grading system is introduced. And we are also working to raise the money for that. I think, I don't want to get into competing mythologies here, but there were several things in Councillor Cunning's account there with which I'd take issue. But I can certainly say that the hard work has all been done. Believe me, the hard work has all already been done by this SNP administration.
Okay, thanks. The second question as well for Councillor Cunning. I think this has been asked of council leaders pretty much all around the country in your party. Can you guarantee that none of your candidates support Scottish independence, and would they be allowed to?
All of our candidates are standing on Labour Party policy, and Labour Party policy does not support Scottish independence. I've seen some of the spurious articles that tend to hark back often 5, 6, 7 years. We have, for example, and I'm proud that he is a candidate, we have a candidate who in 2014 actively campaigned for independence. Since that time, he has changed his mind on the subject. Since that time, he has joined the Labour Party. Since that time, he is now standing on a Labour Party platform to be a councillor in Glasgow City. And we, as a Labour Party, welcome people who have changed their minds, and that is perfectly legitimate process and something that we certainly should in no way be embarrassed of or have any difficulty about.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on to Thomas Kerr with one or two questions for Councillor Kerr. In the last budget round, your Conservatives' proposals was to cut 50 additional language teachers in Glasgow. Do the children that rely on those teachers, for whom English is not their first language, do those children not matter as much to the Conservatives as other children?
Sorry, I missed the last part of that there, Stuart.
Sorry, yeah. Do those children who rely on teachers who are specialists in English as a second language, do those children not matter as much to people in Glasgow to allow them to get the best out of their education system?
No, all children matter to the Glasgow Conservatives. The biggest problem that we had, and we had to make tough decisions as we have had to do for the past 5 years in every single budget that every group has had to put forward. And we had to try and make sure that we were balanced and to make sure that we were supporting people who are struggling with the cost of living. So I was proud that in my budget, we were able to reverse some of the issues to be cleansing. We were supposed to scrap the bulk up the charge, but also crucially, we made sure that we supported a council tax freeze. So we weren't putting any more money on top of hardworking families who are already struggling, which every other party has done over the past 5 years. And secondly, we made sure that we didn't scrap the affordable warmth payment, and £100 went to pensioners who are struggling to heat their homes. So it is right that, you know, we had to try and make tough decisions. Would I have liked to have done it? Absolutely not. And the way in which the budget process is done every single year is absolutely horrendous in the council. We get options coming to us where you have to do as if it's a tick box as to who's going to get a cut and who shouldn't. That should not be the case. We should have investment in this city. That's what the Glasgow Conservatives have called for. We've called to make sure that we want more funding for our councils, and we need that from the Scottish Government. So every child matters to the Glasgow Conservatives, but we had to try and make tough decisions to make sure our budget added up, as all groups had to do. We all have accepted choices that we didn't want to do over the past 5 years, but that is because of savage cuts from the Scottish Government, despite an increase in their budget every single year.
But you proposed that even though the quality risk assessment said that it was very high.
Yeah, and it's not something.
These are some of the most vulnerable children in the city that need support.
It's not something. It's not a decision in which my group took lightly. It's not a decision in which we would have liked to have taken. It's a decision that we had to try and take to make a budget balance up, to make sure that we were not going to be increasing council tax, particularly in those families that are struggling already to make ends meet. I think that we had to try and make sure that families' budgets was not going to be increased, and that was the way in which we had to try and do it. I'm not happy about the fact that we had to do it. I'm not happy about the settlement that Glasgow has. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Glasgow's budget has been fantastic and Nicola Sturgeon has been so gracious to us with all this extra money, as Susan has done. I think that we need to have more money into Glasgow's budget. I think that our local authorities deserve better than what they're getting. But we had to try and do a budget that made sure it balanced up and made sure it worked to make sure we were supporting struggling families.
Okay, thanks. And the second question that I've got for yourself is same again. I think most council leaders of or group leaders of the Conservatives all around the country would have been asked this. Party leaders set the standards. Boris Johnson has been found to have broken the law. Should he resign?
Well, I made my position very clear on this in January, and I stand by the position which I made, Stuart, which is that I don't think that the Prime Minister's his actions I think they're indefensible. And I said this in January, it's a position that I stand by. If it was up to me, I think that the Prime Minister should go. I've said that since January, I've not changed my mind, but this is a local election focused on local issues. The Prime Minister's not on the ballot paper. Instead, we're dealing with the disaster that I think has been the past 5 years of an SNP administration. And I think the Glaswegians will be judging that next week rather than what's going on nationally.
Yeah, but it's still something that people have raised with us, which is why I've brought it up with you tonight. But you've been pretty clear there. You think the Prime Minister should resign. You've not changed your mind on that. Okay, thank you very much. If we move on to John Molyneux, we've spoken a lot about council budgets, how much pressure they're under. The Greens have supported budgets at Holyrood and also at Glasgow City Council level, and have all resulted in a cut in the budget to what services are available. Which has led to people saying that the Greens are the SNP B team. Is that a fair characterisation of your party?
Absolutely not. We had the Greens in Holyrood have tried to address the worst of the cuts that were coming down the track from the Scottish Government, and by far the most significant single year drop in local government funding was in 2017, which was prior to any when the SNP still had a majority in Holyrood. Since then, Greens have reversed cuts. Today there is £60 million in Glasgow's budget that was there as the result of budget U-turns that were won by Green MSPs when we were in opposition. And that, through this council term, when the scare list of venues that are threatened with closure magically gets leaked from the trust-based budget process we have, none of those venues were closed because the investment that Green MSPs secured into the city. So no libraries are closed, no swimming pools are closed. COVID had an impact, but we have always been absolutely steadfast in our commitment to funding those local services. And I would say, we also, importantly, I think for these elections, we as councillors have to account for the decisions that we make in the council budgets. And I'm absolutely clear that when we have worked with the administration on budgets, and we haven't worked with them on every budget this year, or we've worked with them, we've entered every budget to try and find a good faith deal that we thought was in our best interest, and trying to deliver as much of our commitments and our manifesto as possible. And I'm proud that we've actually been able to achieve that. We have put in the £17 million investment into Climate Action Fund. We have put additional funding into recycling. We have put additional funding into public services. It's Greens that put the money in that has reopened all of our libraries. Every other group cut Glasgow Life's budget by £4.7 million last year. We've reversed that. That is sustainable funding. It's in the baseline. So I am absolutely proud of the actions that we've taken. I think we've improved the budget every year when we've been involved. And, you know, we would always, I think, you know, the important thing is here, we do politics in a way that, you know, it's not tribal. We will always work to deliver as much of our priorities, the priorities that people have voted for us in good faith. We will try and implement them. And I see other groups rule things out in positions that are very black and white. And I think it's very strange that people would go to their electorate effectively tying their hands and saying we have no interest in actually delivering large parts of our manifesto. Greens will always deliver the trust that's placed in us.
Okay, thank you. Another question that we continually get raised is a car-free city centre or policies in the city, which some people seem to believe that it's anti-car. So, is the Greens in Glasgow, are you an anti-car party with anti-car policies that will simply hasten the decline of the city centre?
We are absolutely in favour of a city centre and actually a wider city that puts people first. And I said in one of my previous answers, the amount of land use in our city that is given over to private vehicles, whether that's for roads, whether that's for car parking, is staggering. I think there was a report done on the area around the SECC. It's more than a third of the landmass is basically given over to the private car, which is not sustainable. And that is an equalities issue. That severs people from accessing the services and the facilities that they need. We can create, like most modern European cities, we can create a really vibrant, people-friendly city centre with a greater residential population, more people living there, more diversity. That's the future of our city centre. We're right at the start of that, and the pandemic has had a really, really, really hard impact on that. And you can see that in the city centre, but that is not a reason to not keep progressing a vision of a people-friendly city centre where there's a greater residential population, where there's green spaces, where there's a lot less space given over to private cars and a lot more space given over to people getting about their day in ways that are sustainable and actually add to the richness and the diversity of our city rather than creating pollution, creating division and severance in our communities. So the vision's the right one. We do need to deliver it, and I think Greens, with a greater role in the council, Greens will make sure that we have that focus on delivery. The vision is good, but we have to make sure it happens. We have to make sure it happens in a way that brings people with us, and Greens will do that.
Okay, thank you. I think we may be able to get one further question in. We can go around the four leaders on before we ask for closing statements. Should we reduce the number of parades in Glasgow? And in particular, the organisation which hosts the most parades is the Orange Order. So to reduce the number of parades, you would have to be reducing the number of Orange Order parades. Should we reduce the number of parades and within that Orange Order parades? If I could ask Councillor Cunning that first. You're muted, Malcolm.
Yeah. Again, I think there's often a misunderstanding in the wider world about the powers that Glasgow City Council have in this regard, and we cannot ban marches, and we cannot reduce the number of marches simply because we decide to do so. That's not within the legislative framework. That said, I do think there's many people and many communities would love to see far fewer of certain marches happening in the city. But that has to happen by negotiation, that has to happen by discussion, that has to happen by engagement with the organisations that currently organise those marches. And some of that work has been done in the past, and there have been stages where the number of marches have partially reduced. There is, at bottom line, a democratic principle that everybody has the right to march, even people you thoroughly disagree with, even for those, provided they are peaceable marches, provided they are not causing significant disruption or threat in the community, they have a right to happen. And the way forward has to be engagement with the organisations and perhaps simply a natural decline.
Okay, thank you. If I could ask Susan Aitken the same question, would you like to see marches reduced? Is it something that your administration has been working on?
Yes, and yes. I think there's a very clear view from the city that there are too many marches, and the impact on the life of the community and disruption of the life of the community, as it's described in the legislation that governs this, is significant. It's certainly something that the council has discussed with the parading organisations, and I think the ideal position would be for them to unilaterally recognise that this is something that the city wants to see. We actually, I agree entirely. This is very much a human rights issue, and I absolutely support and have publicly upheld the human right to freely assemble and process. But there are other human rights as well. And I think there's a question there, at what point does one human right start to come up against another? And, are some communities having their human right to a private life, for example, disrupted by, every single Saturday in the summer? Having marches processed through their particular communities. So I think there is a genuine issue here. I think the council does not have the power to resolve this unilaterally. The action that Scottish Government's taken to establish a working group to look into this, I think, is very helpful. I think that independent view, a step back from both the council and the organisations, is helpful, and I hope that will find us a way through, perhaps to look at whether the legislation needs to be amended in some way, whether in actual fact this is something that national government should take on rather than leaving it up to local authorities. I don't know. I think there are a number of issues here, but certainly it's an ongoing conversation that the council has been having with the parading organisations. I think just an understanding of where the city is. The council actually commissioned some polling on this about 2.5 years ago now. It's not long before the pandemic, and it came through very, very clearly that people in the city do support the right to march, even if they don't agree with the people who are marching. And that, you could argue that people marching in favour of independence are clearly a lot, there are going to be folk in the city who don't agree with them, but they have that human right to march as well. And people do understand that and they support that, but they definitely want to see fewer marches, and they definitely want to see that disruption to the life of the community significantly reduced. And I think that is something that we should all be working towards. And as I say, I'm glad that there's now an independent national view being worked on, perhaps to help us get to that point where everyone is able to coexist and respect each other's human rights in this matter.
Okay, thank you. Thomas Kerr, do you agree? Would you like to see fewer marches?
I think Malcolm was right when he said that there seems to be a misconception sometimes out in the public that we don't have the power as Glasgow City Council to ban marches or to limit how many marches take place. That's not a power that we have within our grasps to try and do. And what I would like to see actually in the council, and something we do have power of, is to try and review the Public Processions Committee to make sure that it works better with organisers that are taking place. I think that's something that we do want to try and see, and it's something I spoke about a couple of years ago. I always get very uneasy about the idea of limiting marches, no matter what march that is, because of the idea that freedom of speech is out there. So there's many marches that take place in the city centre, some of which are very, mean towards my party, for example. I don't ever want to ban to make sure that those don't take place, because everybody has that right to freedom of speech. Everybody has that right to be able to march and say what they think is best. So I don't support limiting marches. I think that we need to try and make sure we support freedom of speech, and that's something that I'm quite clear on that.
Okay. Thank you very much. John Molyneux.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Susan. The evidence and the polling here is fairly clear that citizens do want to see a reduction. They do want to see a reduction in the disruption that's caused. I guess picking up on some of the comments, I think there is a misunderstanding of or misrepresentation of the law here. So there are powers in law to put conditions, to put restrictions, and in some cases to prohibit marches from progressing. And we have used those powers in the current council term. And there are 4 grounds in law. There are human rights considerations, we accept that, but there's 4 grounds in law under which those measures can be taken: a threat to public order, a threat to public safety, a risk of damage to property, or, as Susan mentioned, disruption to the life of the community. Now, the first 3 of those are very clearly matters that the police advise on. And if the police give advice to the council, then we will take action. We will use the powers that we do have in the law to restrict, and we have done that, whether that's rerouting or whether that's putting additional conditions on marches. So we can do that. The 4th area, this disruption to the life of the community, there's ambiguity over that. So that's not something that the police routinely advise on. I actually think it is something that the council should take more of a role on. The gap at the moment is there is no guidance, there is no statutory guidance from Scottish Government on that aspect, and it's rather vague. Disruption to life of the community could be interpreted in many different ways. So I think we do need some much clearer guidance on that aspect. I believe the council should have the power to adjudicate on that, not putting it onto a national body, because I think actually we are the best place to make the decisions. We understand what disruption means to our communities. So I think we should have a more proactive role in determining these things, and that can take into account, or potentially could take into account, things like the cumulative impact. It could take into account the routes that processions take, and the impact of those routes on particular communities. So I do think there's a case for us being more proactive, not necessarily changing the legislation, but having clearer guidance and being able to use the laws that do exist to better meet, I think, the desires of our communities for far less disruption.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we probably now have to move on to the closing statements from each of the group leaders. It's now after 8 o'clock. So if we can do it in reverse order from which we started. So I would like to ask Susan Aitken to make your closing remarks and make your pitch as to why people should vote for SNP candidates next Thursday. Susan.
Thank you. So the choice in this election is between continuing to move Glasgow forward with the SNP or to take it backwards with Labour and the Tories, 2 parties whose past and present behaviour has so often been the very cause of the deep-seated issues our city faces, whether that's the callous austerity piled on the poorest by the Tories or the financial legacy of years of pay discrimination by Labour, and that is a very significant financial legacy. Glasgow is often referred to as a political battleground, and sometimes it feels like Labour and the Tories treat it just like that. That for them, Glasgow is somewhere to be fought over, and to hell with the consequences for the city. And it seems that so often they have very little positive to say or to offer to Glaswegians. The SNP is different. Our manifesto builds on the progress of the past 5 years, accelerating the pace of change and improvement in almost every single area of the council's business, from education and early years to job creation, from providing homes to providing care, from our built environment to culture and sport, to maintaining and cleaning our neighbourhoods to securing safer streets and cleaner air, from public transport to public health, from tackling poverty to climate action. The SNP will never stop wanting better, asking for more, raising our sights and our ambitions for our city, because that is what Glasgow deserves. Glasgow's best days should always be yet to come, and the SNP is the party with the positive policies, the clear record of achievement, and the serious, comprehensive plan for the future to deliver those best days. So please vote SNP 1, 2 and 3 on the 5th of May. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. If I could ask Councillor John Molyneux to make his closing remarks and why people should vote Scottish Green.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. It's been a good debate, but we have not heard from other parties anything like the urgency and relentless focus on delivery that we need, both to improve our day-to-day services and take the city forward into a zero carbon future. Now, the Scottish Greens have set out a powerful vision using all the powers we have to invest and drive a greener and fairer transition, as well as pushing for more powers locally to deliver our ambition. Our plan will deliver transformation in our everyday services like recycling and roads maintenance, as well as reimagining a new future for local assets, our parks and green spaces, our libraries, our community centres, our transport systems and our built heritage. All of these things can contribute to our vision for a greener and fairer Glasgow. Now, every single Green councillor elected on the 5th of May will work flat out to deliver our manifesto. And we've shown that with just 7 councillors in the last term, we have made a massive difference on climate action, but also for our communities, securing the funding to reopen all of our libraries, backing above inflation increases for foster and kinship carers, and reversing cuts to citizens' advice and women's aid groups. We do that because Greens act with integrity, engage constructively, and get things done. And with more Greens, that positive difference will just keep getting bigger. So you can trust Greens to deliver for your community, for Glasgow, and for the planet. So for a greener and fairer Glasgow, vote Scottish Greens on the 5th of May.
Thank you. If I can now ask Councillor Malcolm Cunning to make his closing remarks and why people should vote Scottish Labour.
Thank you very much. Over the past 5 years, Glasgow has gone backwards. The level of satisfaction in Glasgow's services, as expressed in our regular surveys of Glasgow citizens, shows lower levels of satisfaction in almost every single aspect of Glasgow City's services and Glasgow City's work on behalf of our citizens. And that low reputation is also, sadly, now replicated nationally and internationally in terms of how Glasgow is seen. Glasgow is a great city. Glasgow is the driving force of Scotland's economy. Glasgow is the dear green place which all Glaswegians love and treasure. What we need is an administration that once again is standing up for the city, standing for a fair deal for the city, and has a plan that not only takes us out of the pandemic, but a plan that addresses the issues as identified by our citizens. And that's the state of our roads and pavements. That's the state of our parks. That's the state of our libraries and the dozens of facilities that do still remain open in communities across our city. And there is no short-term prospect of them reopening at the moment. We need to invest in the city. We need to invest in its people, and only Labour is offering that. If you love Glasgow, vote Labour.
Okay, thank you very much, Malcolm. And finally, if I could ask Thomas Kerr for the Scottish Conservatives for your closing remarks and why people should vote for the Scottish Conservatives next week.
Okay, thank you. Well, next week's election will be crucial for how our city goes forward over the next 5 years and how we recover from the pandemic. It's my belief, and I think the belief of many Glaswegians, that the past 5 years Glasgow has deserved better than what it's got, that the administration that we've had has been useless and incompetent and has led to a situation where we are the fly-tipping capital of Britain, where we have rats running wild, where we have overflowing bins and potholes not being filled, where we've got a situation where the administration can't get the basics right. But that phrase, Glasgow deserves better, was something that Labour had been using for a short time in this campaign. And there's a deep irony with that, because For 35 years before the SNP, Labour was in charge in Glasgow, and I believe that they would have neglected this city for just as long as what the SNP has done as well. I think that Glasgow does deserve better. It deserves better than the two parties that have ran this city into the ground, in my eyes. I think it deserves a real alternative, somebody who's going to offer a fresh set of eyes on what we'd like to do going forward into the future. It deserves local champions in the city chambers who will fight for every single community, whether they're, no matter what side of the city it's in, or forgotten communities that have been left behind for too long. And it deserves councillors who will focus on the day job and focus on the basics, not focus on having party political debates in the chamber about issues that we don't have any control over. That's what Glasgow Conservatives will do. We're offering a real alternative. And if you want to send a shockwave through the city chambers next Thursday, then please vote Scottish Conservative #1 next week, and you'll have local champions in the city chambers delivering for your community and who will clean up Glasgow.
Okay. Thank you very much, Thomas. And thank you to all four of our participants tonight: John Molyneux for the Scottish Greens, Thomas Kerr, Scottish Conservatives, Malcolm Cunning for Scottish Labour, Susan Aitken for the SNP. And thanks to everyone who logged on to YouTube, Facebook or Twitter and who took part and put comments in the comments section. There'll be a report on the debate in tomorrow's Glasgow Times, which excellent value at just 80 pence, and it will also be online at www.glasgowtimes.co.uk. So I'd just like to thank everyone once again for their time tonight, and we'll see everyone again soon. Thank you very much.